The moment my husband looked at my phone, I expected another argument. Instead, I watched every trace of anger disappear from his face. His fingers stopped scrolling. His shoulders dropped. He looked at the screen for almost a full minute without saying a single word. Then, in a voice I had never heard before, he whispered, "I didn't know." I looked at him calmly. "No," I replied, "you never wanted to know." But that moment wasn't really about 12 missed calls or a chat history. It was about every conclusion he had reached before asking a single question. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Before we go any further, drop your first name and the city you're watching from in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and let's continue today's story. 3 days earlier, I had gone back to work as if nothing had happened. At least that's what everyone around me believed. Inside, I felt strangely empty. Not angry. Not heartbroken. Just tired. I worked as a senior financial analyst for a logistics company that managed transportation contracts across 5 states. For the last 6 years, I had built my reputation one report at a time. I had reduced operating costs by 18.4%. Negotiated vendor contracts worth nearly $9.7 million. Created forecasting models that the company still used every quarter. None of those achievements mattered when I walked through my own front door. There I wasn't a respected professional. I was simply the wife. And apparently, a wife arriving home with another man deserved suspicion before explanation. Monday morning felt ordinary. Emails, meetings, coffee, budget revisions. Yet every time my phone buzzed, I instinctively remembered Saturday night. Not because of the stranger. Because of my husband's words. "You seemed comfortable enough getting out of another man's car." It wasn't shouting that hurt. It was how easily he believed it. Like he had been waiting for a reason. Around noon, my colleague Priya stopped by my desk. "You've been quiet." "I'm just catching up." She tilted her head. "No, you're pretending to catch up." I smiled politely. She didn't push further. People often think kindness means asking endless questions. Sometimes kindness is knowing when silence is enough. That evening I stayed late again. Ironically, not because I wanted to. Quarter-end reporting had to be finalized before Wednesday. By 8:40 p.m., only 6 employees remained on our floor. By 9:30 p.m., just 3. By 10:15 p.m., I was alone except for the security guard downstairs. As I packed my laptop, my phone vibrated. It was another missed call from the same unknown number that had tried reaching me repeatedly on Saturday night. I frowned. Who keeps calling for 3 days? I ignored it again. 5 minutes later, another call. This time I answered. "Hello," a familiar voice replied. "Ma'am, this is Daniel." It took me a second. Then I remembered. The man who had helped me. "So, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, is everything all right?" "I've actually been trying to reach you since Saturday." "I noticed. I just wanted to make sure you got home safely." "I did." There was a pause. "I also wanted to tell you something." "What is it?" "I think you left something in my car." I frowned. "I don't think so." "The back seat." I searched my memory. Then suddenly, "My notebook." "Exactly." I sighed. That notebook wasn't expensive. But it contained almost 4 years of handwritten financial observations, project notes, career goals, and ideas. Losing it would have hurt. I can't believe I forgot it. I figured it was important. "It is. I can drop it off tomorrow if that's convenient." I hesitated. After everything that had happened. "No," I said gently. "I'll pick it up somewhere public. Whatever makes you comfortable." He wasn't offended. He simply respected the boundary. We agreed to meet outside a cafe near my office the next afternoon. The conversation lasted less than 4 minutes. Professional, polite, nothing more. What I didn't know was that those calls and messages would later become the evidence my husband desperately wished he had looked at before judging me. Tuesday afternoon arrived. The cafe was crowded with office workers. Daniel was already sitting outside with a paper cup of coffee. He stood as soon as he saw me. "I kept it exactly where you left it." He handed over the notebook. "I really appreciate this." "No problem." I opened it. Everything was inside. Every page. Every sticky note. Even the loose receipt I had been using as a bookmark. "You didn't even look through it." He smiled. It wasn't mine. Such a simple sentence, yet somehow more respectful than everything my husband had said that night. I thanked him again. Before leaving, he said something unexpected. "I almost didn't stop that night." I looked at him. "I had already driven past your car." "What changed your mind?" "My younger sister." I frowned slightly. "She broke down on a highway 3 years ago." His eyes drifted toward the road. Dozens of cars drove past. My chest tightened. The first person who stopped saved her. He smiled sadly. "So now I stop." I nodded. "I'm glad you did." "So am I." We walked in opposite directions. That should have been the end of it. And for me, it was. When I returned home that evening, my husband barely looked up from the television. "You're late." "Had work." HM. No questions. No conversation. No apology. Sometimes silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's simply pride refusing to admit it might be wrong. I went upstairs, placed the notebook back on my shelf, and continued my life. At least I tried to. The next morning, something happened that neither of us expected. Continue. Wednesday morning began like every other weekday. The alarm rang at 6:15. I made coffee for both of us out of habit. He thanked me without looking up from his phone. We exchanged exactly 14 words before leaving the house. If someone had watched us from outside, they would have said we looked like a perfectly normal married couple. Only the two of us knew how much distance could exist inside the same kitchen. At 9:10 a.m., I was halfway through reviewing freight invoices when my department director, Melissa, walked to my desk. "Conference room B, 10 minutes. Is something wrong?" Actually, she smiled, "Something very right." That sentence immediately made me nervous. Good news in corporate offices often arrived wrapped in extra meetings. When I entered the conference room, 6 senior managers were already there. A presentation filled the large screen. My name appeared on the first slide. For a second, I wondered if I had made a mistake worth documenting. Melissa noticed my expression and laughed softly. "Relax." Then she turned toward everyone else. "I'd like everyone to know that the forecasting model Emily designed 18 months ago has officially reduced our annual transportation losses by another 7.2%. The vice president nodded. "That translates to approximately $3.4 million this fiscal year." I blinked. I knew the model had been performing well. I hadn't realized the impact had become that significant. Another executive slid a folder toward me. "We'd like you to lead the national implementation." I stared at him. "National?" "We're expanding into 12 additional distribution centers." The room became very quiet. Melissa smiled. "You've earned this." For a few seconds I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because my mind unexpectedly wandered back to Saturday night. It amazed me how life could split into 2 completely different versions. At work, people trusted my judgment enough to put millions of dollars under my supervision. At home, The person who knew me best hadn't trusted me enough to ask a single question before accusing me. Those two realities collided inside my head. I accepted the promotion. Everyone applauded. Someone joked that I finally owed the department lunch. People laughed. The meeting ended. As everyone walked out, Melissa stopped beside me. You should celebrate. I might. No, might, definitely. She studied my face. You still don't seem happy. I smiled politely. I'm processing. She nodded. I understand. She didn't. How could she? Professional success cannot automatically repair personal disappointment. That evening, I arrived home carrying a small bakery box. Not because I wanted a celebration. Simply because promotions deserve cake, even if nobody else notices. My husband looked at the box. What's that? I got promoted. He looked surprised. So, silence. Then, congratulations. It sounded sincere. But distant. He didn't ask what the promotion meant. Didn't ask about my new role. Didn't ask how I felt. Instead, after another minute, he asked, So, does that mean you'll be working even later? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it perfectly summarized our marriage over the past year. Achievement had become secondary. Convenience came first. I'll probably travel more. That was all. I placed the cake in the refrigerator. Neither of us ate it that night. Around 10:30, while I was reading in bed, I heard his phone ring downstairs. A few minutes later, he came back looking distracted. My mother wants us over for dinner Friday. I nodded. Okay. I already said we'd come. That's fine. He hesitated. I told her about Saturday. I looked up from my book. You did. I only said what happened. No, I answered quietly. You told her what you believed happened. He looked uncomfortable. I wasn't trying to embarrass you. I know. But you still did. He didn't argue. For the first time since that night. He looked uncertain. Not convinced he had been right. Just unwilling to admit he might have been wrong. Friday evening arrived. His parents lived about 40 minutes away. His mother greeted us warmly. His father shook my hand. Dinner began pleasantly enough. His younger sister, Rachel, was also there with her husband. Halfway through the meal, his mother smiled at me. So, I looked up. I heard you had quite an adventure last weekend. The table became quiet. I knew immediately where this conversation had come from. It wasn't much of an adventure. No, my car broke down. And a strange man brought you home. She said it lightly, almost joking. But everyone at the table looked at me. Waiting. I placed my fork down carefully. Yes, and that was all. She smiled awkwardly. Of course. My husband stared at his plate. His father cleared his throat. What happened to the car? Finally, someone asking the actual question. The alternator failed. And roadside assistance. I couldn't get through. He nodded. That happens more often than people think. The conversation moved on. But something had already shifted. People don't always remember accusations. Sometimes they simply remember that an accusation existed. Later that night, while everyone else was in the living room, Rachel quietly joined me in the kitchen. I hope you don't mind me asking. I don't. Did your husband really think? She didn't finish. I answered anyway. Yes. She sighed. I'm sorry. I'll be all right. She looked at me for a long moment. You know. What? My brother wasn't always like this. I stayed silent. When we were kids, he trusted everyone. What changed? Our dad lost almost everything because he trusted the wrong business partner. I listened. After that, she shrugged. My brother started believing that expecting disappointment was safer than expecting honesty. That sentence stayed with me. Because suddenly, his behavior made sense. Not acceptable, but understandable. Sometimes people inherit fear the same way they inherit eye color. They don't choose it, but they still decide what to do with it. I wondered whether he even realized how often his fear spoke louder than his love. I was about to find out. The drive home was almost completely silent. Streetlights reflected across the windshield in long golden lines. My husband kept both hands on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed ahead. Twice it looked as though he wanted to say something. Twice he stayed quiet. I didn't force the conversation. Some silences need room before words can grow inside them. When we reached home, he turned off the engine but didn't get out immediately. I've been thinking about what Rachel said. I looked at him. So have I. He exhaled slowly. I know my father's business situation affected me. It did. But that's not an excuse. No, it just explains why I sometimes. He searched for the right word. And expect the worst. I nodded. I know. That was the first honest conversation we had shared in days. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears. No promises that everything would suddenly become perfect. Just two people finally speaking instead of defending themselves. The next morning I woke before sunrise. Old habits die slowly. Coffee. A quiet house. The sound of birds outside the kitchen window. For the first time in nearly a week, the air inside our home didn't feel heavy. Around 9:30 a.m., my husband was paying bills on his laptop in the living room. I was organizing paperwork from work, including receipts, meeting notes, and warranty documents for my car repair. I think the mechanic emailed me another invoice, I said. Can you check your email? My phone's charging upstairs. I'll grab it. A minute later he returned holding my phone. It keeps vibrating. It's probably work. He placed it beside me. The screen lit up again. A notification appeared from my mobile provider reminding me about voicemail. He glanced at the screen without touching it. 12 missed calls. I looked over. Most were still there. The unknown number from last Saturday. Along with the later calls from Daniel before I finally answered him. I never cleared them. He frowned. I thought you only talked to him once. I did. His expression changed. There are 12 missed calls. Because I ignored every one of them. He looked confused. Why? Because I didn't know who was calling. He sat down across from me. Can I ask something? You can. Would you show me? I understood what he meant. He wasn't asking to inspect my phone. He was asking because, for the first time, he realized he hadn't known the whole story. Without saying anything, I unlocked it and handed it to him. He opened the recent calls. 12 unanswered calls. 1 answered call. Duration. 3 minutes and 48 seconds. Then he opened the messages. The first one read. Ma'am, this is Daniel, the person who helped with your car. I think you accidentally left a notebook in my back seat. Another message. Please don't worry, I only want to return it. Let me know whenever it's convenient. Then, a public place is perfectly fine, I'll bring the notebook. Finally, glad everything was returned safely, take care. Nothing more. No flirting. No late-night conversations. No hidden jokes. No emojis. No deleted messages. Just basic courtesy. He continued scrolling. Then he stopped. Near the top was the first message Daniel had sent on Saturday night. Your husband looked upset when I dropped you off. I hope I didn't cause any misunderstanding. My husband closed his eyes. Very slowly. He read it again. And again. When he finally looked at me, there was no anger left. Only regret. I judged both of you. I didn't answer. I judged someone who stopped to help. His voice became quieter. And I judged my own wife. He placed the phone carefully on the table, as though it had become heavier than before. I am ashamed. Those 3 words hung in the room. They weren't dramatic. They weren't rehearsed. They were simply true. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Eventually, he asked, "Why didn't you show me this the first night?" I thought about it. Then answered honestly, "Because I didn't think I should have to prove I deserved your trust." He lowered his head. "You're right. No marriage survives because one person keeps presenting evidence." His eyes filled, not with tears but with the weight of recognition. "I made you feel like you were on trial." "Yes. And you hadn't done anything wrong." "No." He nodded slowly. "I understand now." I believed that he understood. Understanding, however, is only the beginning. Real change is measured much later. Not by apologies. By behavior. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. His phone rang. It was his mother. He answered on speaker while fixing a shelf in the garage. After a few minutes, she casually mentioned, "I've still been thinking about last weekend." He interrupted her. "Mom, what?" "I need to correct something." I looked up from the doorway. "I shouldn't have told you what I assumed." Silence. "I accused Emily before I knew the facts." Another pause. "She did nothing wrong." His mother sounded surprised. "So, I was wrong." "I see." The man who helped her was exactly what he appeared to be. He continued. He stopped because her car had broken down. "I understand. And I shouldn't have repeated my assumptions." When he ended the call, he didn't look at me for approval. He simply went back to tightening the screws on the shelf. That mattered more than any speech. Because real accountability is usually quiet. It doesn't perform. It corrects. A week later, our company held its quarterly leadership meeting. That morning, I received an email informing me that my promotion would be announced to every regional office during the live conference. As I stood on the stage accepting recognition for years of work, I noticed my phone vibrating backstage. When I checked it afterward, there was a single message from my husband. "I'm proud of you, I should have said that a long time ago." I read it twice before putting the phone away. Some words arrive late. But when they're followed by changed actions, they still matter. The real lesson of my story wasn't about a broken car. Or 12 missed calls. Or even one painful accusation. It was about how quickly fear can become a system, a way of seeing every situation through suspicion instead of trust. That system doesn't destroy relationships in one dramatic moment. It erodes them one assumption at a time. The night my car broke down, a stranger chose kindness. The harder journey was watching someone who loved me learn to choose trust. That lesson took much longer. And it changed both of us far more than a single night ever could. Tell me in the comments, if you were in my position, would you have forgiven your spouse after an apology like this, or would it have taken much longer to rebuild your trust? Subscribe to Revenge Cold Stories, and I'll see you in the next one. The story should have ended there. Most people think an apology is the final chapter. In real life, it's usually the beginning of a much harder one. Trust doesn't return because someone says, "I'm sorry." It returns when dozens of ordinary days slowly prove that those words meant something. The Monday after my promotion announcement, I left for work a little earlier than usual. As I picked up my car keys, my husband called from the kitchen. "Text me when you get there." I smiled faintly. I always do. "I know." He hesitated. I just realized I used to assume instead of ask. It was a small sentence, but it was different from the man who had stood in the driveway making assumptions only a week before. That evening, he surprised me again. When I arrived home, there was a folded piece of paper on the dining table. Not a love letter. Not flowers. Just a handwritten list. At the top he had written, "Things I should have asked before making assumptions." The first line read, "Are you okay?" The second, "What happened?" The third, "Is there anything you need from me?" The fourth, "Can you tell me the whole story?" At the bottom he had written only one sentence. I skipped all four and went straight to judgment. I folded the paper carefully. Some people apologize with expensive gifts. Others apologize by showing they finally understood where they went wrong. For me, that list meant more than jewelry ever could. Over the following months, life settled into something quieter. My new position meant traveling to different distribution centers across the country. Sometimes I spent 2 or 3 nights away from home. Ironically, those trips became the real test of whether anything had changed. The first time I traveled, my husband drove me to the airport. Before I got out of the car, he smiled. "Call me when you land." "I will." Then he laughed. "And if your flight gets delayed, I'll let you know." "No," he corrected himself. "I'll ask what happened before I imagine the worst." We both laughed. For the first time in a long while, it felt effortless. Months later, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, we were cleaning out the hallway closet when I found the roadside emergency kit I had bought after my car broke down. Inside was the old flashlight that had almost run out of battery that night. A reflective safety vest. A portable jump starter. And the mechanic's receipt. I held the receipt for a moment. He noticed. "You still think about that night?" "Sometimes." "So do I." He leaned against the doorframe. "You know what bothers me the most?" "What?" "That a complete stranger treated you with more respect in 10 minutes than I did." I looked at him. "I've thought about that too." He nodded slowly. "I can't change that night." "No, but I can make sure you never feel that way again." There was no dramatic promise. No theatrical embrace. Just a quiet commitment. The kind that has to be renewed every ordinary day afterward. About 6 months later, something unexpected happened. On my way home from work, I saw a car stopped on the shoulder of the highway. Its hazard lights flashed through the evening traffic. A young woman stood beside it, looking anxiously at passing vehicles. Without thinking, I slowed down, pulled over a safe distance ahead, and walked back. "Are you all right?" She looked relieved. "My battery died." "Have you called anyone?" "My phone's almost dead." I smiled. "I have a jump starter." Within 15 minutes, her car was running again. She thanked me over and over. Before leaving, she said something that stayed with me. I was starting to think nobody would stop. I smiled gently. "Someone once stopped for me." She drove away. As I returned to my own car, I realized something. Kindness has a way of traveling. One person helps another. That person eventually helps someone else. The chain continues. Fear spreads that way. But so does compassion. When I reached home that evening, I told my husband what had happened. He listened carefully, then smiled. "I'm glad you stopped." "So am I." He didn't ask who she was. He didn't wonder why I had been late. He simply trusted me. That quiet moment told me more than any apology ever could. Looking back now, I rarely think about the accusation itself. What I remember most is the lesson behind it. Trust isn't built during easy days. It's revealed during difficult ones. When life suddenly becomes confusing, inconvenient, or frightening, we all choose one of two paths. We can ask questions, or we can write our own answers before hearing the truth. One path builds relationships. The other slowly destroys them. My husband learned that lesson the hard way. I learned another. Never let someone else's fear convince you to doubt your own integrity. Sometimes the greatest form of justice isn't proving someone wrong. It's quietly continuing to be exactly who you have always been until the truth speaks for itself. And in the end, it always does. About a year passed before that Saturday night became something we could talk about without feeling the weight of it. It had become part of our history, rather than a wound that reopened every time it was mentioned. One evening, while we were organizing old photos and documents, my husband picked up the small notebook Daniel had returned. "You still keep this?" I smiled. "It contains 4 years of my career." He turned it over in his hands. "It's strange." "What is?" If he hadn't insisted on returning this, I might never have realized how badly I handled everything. I nodded. Sometimes people unknowingly become part of someone else's lesson. A few days later, our company held its annual leadership conference. More than 300 managers from different regional offices attended. I had been asked to give a 20-minute presentation on operational forecasting and cost optimization. Standing on that stage, looking out across the audience, I wasn't nervous. I knew my work. I knew the numbers. When the presentation ended, the applause lasted much longer than I expected. Afterward, several younger analysts approached me with notebooks full of questions. One of them said something that stayed with me. "I hope one day people trust my judgment the way they trust yours." I thanked him politely. But inside, I couldn't help thinking about the contrast. Hundreds of professionals who barely knew me trusted my judgment because they had seen my work. At home, trust had once been interrupted by a single moment of fear. That difference reminded me that trust is never automatic. It has to be protected, especially with the people closest to us. That night, my husband insisted on taking me out to dinner to celebrate. During the meal, he looked unusually thoughtful. "I've been meaning to ask you something." "What? If that night had happened today?" I waited. "Would you still have come home with the man who offered to help?" The answer came immediately. "Yes." He nodded before I even finished. "I would too." I looked at him surprised. He smiled. "Because now I understand the difference between accepting help and betraying trust." That sentence meant more than he probably realized. It showed he hadn't simply regretted his reaction. He had changed the way he understood the situation. Months later, we were driving along the same road where my car had broken down. The repaired guardrail looked newer. The shoulder had been widened. Traffic moved just as heavily as it had that night. He slowed the car for a moment. "This is where it happened, isn't it?" "Yes." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he quietly said, "I'm grateful someone stopped." "So am I. And I'm grateful you didn't let my worst moment become the final definition of who I was." I looked out the window before answering. "I didn't forgive you because you apologized." He glanced at me. "I forgave you because you changed. There is a difference. An apology is measured in minutes. Change is measured in months and years." As we continued driving, I watched another car pull safely onto the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. Within 2 minutes, another driver stopped behind it to help. I smiled without realizing it. "What?" "Nothing." "No, tell me." "I was just thinking." "What?" "The world still has people willing to stop." He smiled too. "And hopefully a few more people willing to ask questions before making assumptions." That became our private joke. Whenever one of us started jumping to conclusions about anything, work, family, schedules, or simple misunderstandings, the other would smile and ask, "Questions first, eh?" The answer was always the same. "Questions first, eh?" It's amazing how 4 simple words can change the atmosphere of an entire relationship. Looking back today, people often assume my story is about a marriage nearly ruined by jealousy. I don't think that's completely true. I think it's about something much more common. How easily ordinary fear disguises itself as certainty. How quickly our minds fill in missing details with stories that feel true simply because we're afraid. Fear says, I already know what happened. Trust says, help me understand. Only one of those allows another person to be heard. That night my car broke down because of a mechanical failure. But our marriage stumbled because of a communication failure. One was repaired by replacing an alternator. The other required replacing assumptions with conversations. The repair took much longer. It was also far more valuable. So if there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. When someone you love walks through the door carrying a story you don't yet understand, don't greet them with conclusions. Greet them with curiosity. You might discover that the truth is kinder than the version fear created in your mind. And sometimes, asking one simple question can save a relationship long before it needs to be repaired. Years have passed since that night, but one memory remains clearer than all the others. It isn't the sound of my car engine failing. It isn't standing alone under the dim streetlight. It isn't even the argument when I reached home. It's the moment Daniel rolled down his window before I got out of his car. He had smiled politely and said, I hope tomorrow is easier than today. At the time, I thought he was talking about the broken car. He wasn't. He had noticed the expression on my face when my husband opened the front door. He understood that my hardest journey wasn't the drive home. It was walking through it. For a long time, I wondered if he ever knew how much his simple kindness had mattered. Not because he gave me a ride. Because he reminded me that decency still exists, even between complete strangers. A few months after everything settled down, I received an unexpected message on LinkedIn. It was from Daniel. The message was short. I hope your notebook is still helping you. Congratulations on your promotion. Wishing you continued success. That was all. No personal questions. No attempt to continue a friendship. No hidden meanings. I smiled and replied just once. Thank you again for helping me that night. I wish you and your family the very best. Neither of us contacted the other again. Some people enter your life for only a few minutes. Yet they leave behind lessons that remain for years. Today, whenever someone asks me what the biggest turning point in my marriage was, they usually expect me to mention the apology. I don't. The turning point happened before the apology. It happened when my husband finally became willing to admit that he might be wrong. Pride keeps people trapped. Humility opens the door to healing. Without that first step, no relationship can move forward. These days, whenever either of us is upset, we follow one simple rule. No accusations until both people have told the entire story. It's surprisingly difficult. But it works. We've avoided countless misunderstandings because of that one habit. Friends sometimes tell us we communicate well. They don't realize our communication was built on the ruins of a painful mistake. Some lessons are expensive. Ours cost us several sleepless nights, a great deal of trust, and the realization that love without respect is incomplete. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, I want to leave you with one final thought. Life will eventually put every relationship through an unexpected test. It may not be a broken-down car. It may not happen at 11 o'clock at night. It may be a delayed flight. An unanswered phone call. A misunderstanding at work. A rumor. A missed message. A coincidence that looks suspicious from the outside. In those moments, remember this. Facts are usually quiet. Assumptions are usually loud. Choose the quiet path. Ask, listen, understand. Because the people we love deserve the chance to explain before they're expected to defend themselves. And sometimes, the strongest relationships aren't the ones that never face doubt. They're the ones that learn how to replace doubt with trust, one honest conversation at a time. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been judged before anyone asked for your side of the story? How did you handle it? Don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Cold Stories, and I'll see you in the next one. The comments on that video surprised me more than the story itself. Thousands of people shared moments from their own lives. Some had been misunderstood by their spouses. Others admitted they had been the ones who jumped to conclusions and later regretted it. As I read through them, I realized something important. My story had never been unique. Only the details were. The pattern was everywhere. Someone comes home late. A phone goes unanswered. A stranger appears in the wrong place at the wrong time. Fear fills in the blanks. Trust waits for the facts. One evening, almost 2 years after my car broke down, my husband and I were driving home from visiting friends. It was close to 11 o'clock again. Rain had started falling lightly. Almost instinctively, we both looked toward the stretch of highway where everything had happened. He smiled. I still check that shoulder whenever we pass. So do I. What are you looking for? Someone who might need help. He nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. A few miles later, we actually saw a small hatchback stopped with its hazard lights flashing. Without either of us saying a word, he slowed down. Let's make sure they're okay. This time we stopped together. A young couple stood beside the car. Their battery had died. My husband connected the portable jump starter, while I called roadside assistance to make sure they had backup if the battery failed again. 10 minutes later, their engine started. The young man thanked us repeatedly. Before leaving, he smiled and said, "I didn't think anyone would stop this late." My husband looked at him and replied with a quiet smile. "Someone once stopped for us too." As we got back into our own car, I reached over and squeezed his hand. He knew exactly why. Neither of us mentioned the past. We didn't have to. Sometimes the greatest evidence that someone has changed isn't found in their words. It's found in the choices they make when life quietly gives them another chance. As we drove away, I looked through the passenger window at the highway disappearing behind us. For the first time, that road no longer reminded me of suspicion. It reminded me of kindness. And that, more than anything else, felt like the real ending to my story. Epilogues are strange. They don't usually contain dramatic confrontations. Life simply keeps moving, and one day you notice that something which once controlled your thoughts has quietly lost its power. About 3 years after that night, my company invited employees to speak during a mentorship program for new graduates. The topic they assigned me was leadership under pressure. Everyone expected stories about budgets, deadlines, and difficult negotiations. Instead, I told them something much simpler. The most expensive mistakes I've ever seen weren't caused by a lack of intelligence, I said. They were caused by people believing they already knew the answer before they had all the information. The room became very quiet. One young analyst raised his hand. Has that ever happened to you personally? I smiled. Yes. I learned that lesson outside of work. I didn't tell the entire story. I didn't need to. The lesson mattered more than the details. After the session ended, several people thanked me. One young woman stayed behind. My father always tells me to explain first and defend later, she said. I never understood why. Do you now? She nodded. I think so. As I walked back to my office, I thought about how wisdom often travels. One person's painful experience becomes another person's shortcut. If sharing my story prevented even one unnecessary accusation somewhere in the future, then perhaps that difficult night had created something worthwhile after all. That evening, I reached home just after sunset. My husband was watering the small plants we had placed along the front porch. He smiled as soon as he saw my car. How was your day? Productive. Anything interesting happen? I laughed. I spent 20 minutes telling strangers not to jump to conclusions. He smiled knowingly. Sounds familiar. It does. We sat outside with 2 cups of tea as the evening slowly turned into night. No television. No phones. Just conversation. At one point, he looked toward the driveway and quietly said, "You know what I've realized." "What?" "Trust isn't something you give once." I waited. "It's something you practice." I looked at him and smiled. Exactly. That sentence perfectly captured everything we had learned. Not just about marriage. About friendship, family, work, life. Every day gives us another opportunity to trust a little better, listen a little longer, and assume a little less. And perhaps that's the quiet kind of revenge this story was always about. Not revenge against another person, but revenge against the fear that once convinced us to believe the worst. Fear lost. Trust won. Quietly. One ordinary day at a time. The end.